couple of finance committee members, in addition to myself in attendance. We have a quorum. Okay, so yeah, let's kick it off with any kind of amendments to the agenda. Corinne, you had asked that we talk about developments in Montpelier. So
Yes,
Sherry's got a two-pager to share with us on that topic this evening. Why don't we add that to the agenda as the first substantive item? I can't remember if that's.
Are y'all relying on me to take notes? Because if so, stand by so I can get up and running.
That'd be amazing if you could. I'll go close the door and then you get up.
Oh, we're at max. Okay.
So this will be, if someone could make a motion, we'll add it as agenda item number 4. How'd that be?
I will move to add a Montpelier update.
Sounds good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. We'll add that in. Any public comment this evening? Anybody from the public?
We're gonna move the AI bot.
So yeah, nobody wants to step out of their official roles. All right, so let's talk about that Montpelier update, Chair.
So, Wednesday afternoon, we heard the rollout. It was very interesting because it wasn't the governor, it was the Secretary of Ed. And allegedly there was going to be questions, but there were no questions. So that was very interesting. Thursday, the Vermont Superintendents Association met with majority of the superintendents. As Raf described it, here's Zoe presenting for 2 hours in front of the people who are losing their jobs. So it was
Right.
quite interesting. My first takeaway was it's only 17 pages because there's so much legislation that's going to have to happen for this to occur.
Right.
I believed that this was to rile up the contingency to see who was going to make a counteroffer. What I learned today, and I will not put too much meat to it, is that I think the governor is now going to take extreme measures in order to have his plan be accomplished. I start to put my head in the place of all the laws that will need to be changed in order for that plan to occur, and my head starts spinning. One of the things we brought up is we're in negotiations. Other districts are in teacher negotiations. Do I not negotiate because you're going to have a state contract? They hadn't even considered that. Do you have an example of what this organization will look like with one superintendent? Because there will have to be assistant superintendents because the work doesn't go away when you reduce the positions. They had no model. Do you have a plan for the process? And all they have is a timeline. And I can send this to you guys digitally. I made up copies. I wasn't sure who was going to show up. And the timeline basically has this year about finances, but this whole plan allegedly would be accomplished in 4 years. Friday afternoon received, it's happening fast and furious. Friday afternoon, superintendents received an email saying that they're going to have what they call sprint teams, which is a structure they've used before. The sprint teams would be the opportunity for input. We have until Thursday to identify each association, so principals, superintendents, business managers, curriculum coordinators, what am I going to say, school board, all would have one representative for each of the committees. So it's feeling like gaslighting, I have to say, because even in the meeting with the superintendents, it was interesting, Secretary Sandra's like, oh, we're going to have these committees and you can have input. And the director of the Superintendents Association said, oh, we can organize that. And Zoe said, no, you can just email me directly. So there was pretty clear that the associations are not being valued in the process. Exactly. So it's pretty scary to think about all the different things that could or would change as a result of this. Not that change doesn't need to happen, and you drill it down to the why there are schools that need to close. There are, and there's superintendents who will say there are districts that need to close, but there was no, the Act 46 process that we used was not effective in other communities. And still there are lots of, there are many districts that have multiple school board still because of the structure and it's really hard to move forward. And there's some districts that are really struggling close to us. And you can understand that there needs to be new leadership and new structure. I think that it was very interesting at one moment in time when they were talking about part of the issue is trusting that districts will remain below the threshold and do what's best for Vermont. And Zoe was looking directly at me.
Mhm.
And it was the only time that Zoe was looking directly at me, and I wasn't in the front row. So
Mhm.
there's this tension. I think the governor, and again, I don't mind being on tape. I think the governor feels very supportive and strong in the last election, and this is his opportunity to make the changes that were not accomplished through Act 46. So,
Yeah, it's interesting. Just a couple observations. One is in my opinion, the fundamental failure of Act 46 was that the legislature left all the hard work to the local level, and it was impossible to accomplish at the local level because everyone was just self-interested in their existing schools. And so, like, if you take our school district, for instance, we had our own goals to, get the middle school, high school building vote off the ground. And so in order to kind of build consensus or to have a cohesive sort of district that could support a single middle school, high school building, we needed to do nice things like, preserve Prosper Valley or Pomfret, and we needed to invest in Reading for Reading, right? In doing that, we achieved great results at the polls, right, in those communities, but we did not achieve the intent of Act 46 in closing additional schools, right? So at least that's my perspective from somebody who's kind of been on the board and executing things. But what we're seeing now is the opposite, honestly, I hope, which is action being taken at the state level, hard decisions being made, and the willingness to suffer the slings and arrows that come with it, right? Because there's going to be communities that say, what do you mean we're not going to have the Vandals anymore? I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know if there's any Vermont schools named the Vandals, but people are very invested in their local schools and communities and things. So if we get that kind of top down, strongman sort of governance from the governor, then hey, at least it's a step forward, and the rest of us, I guess, will just get used to it and do the best we can with what results. But the timeline is, I mean, for me, someone who's been on the school board for 6 years in anticipation of my children who are now 7 and 9's high school experiences, to hear an announcement yet again of something on the not near horizon, and completely left out of any of this is anything about school buildings, is it's kind of like, okay, here we go again. But I guess we'll see. It must be far more threatening, imminent to our administration sitting in the room, right?
I absolutely, there are school districts who need help. We are running well, we have good conversations, we're doing really meaningful work, and there are districts who are struggling to get paychecks paid. I mean, there are lots of really heavy issues going down, and I think that we want students, I mean, the right thing is we want students to have similar experiences no matter what town they live in. And I think there are lots of obstacles, and some of it's school boards that are not allowing administration to do their jobs. And so by creating this one mega school board, but again, it puts a lot of power in the governor's hands. It'll be AOE and the governor running the state education system. That changes every 2 years, not for this governor, but it has in the past. That's a lot of whiplash that I worry about. It's taken many years, good school boards, lots of great faculty to commit to a district that wants to do the right thing. And having opportunities to bring districts together so more students have access to that is a really good thing.
What did we see here today? There's supposed to be legislative language in February from the governor. That's what Charlie Kimball indicated.
Tomorrow's the budget rollout, which will give us numbers, and Charlie's really focused on the numbers. Where are the savings? And I just don't see the savings that they're talking about.
Right.
So in order to make this happen, legislation has to be at crossover mid-March. So that would have to be, and it's the whole Green Book. I mean, it's this much law, it's statute, that would need to change in order to accomplish this. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, I'm not sure how much he's willing to go out after. Do you want to speak to what the foundation formula is? If people have questions about that, how that would work?
My interpretation of the foundation formula is that it's really Act 60 all over again, and with a couple twists. And we know that the Brigham decision said that Act 60 was not equitable, and so it can't work. You know, coming from New Hampshire, we've been under a foundation formula that's been grossly inadequate for 50 years. And the state's been sued for 50 continuous years over it. And in New Hampshire, the reason that they're spending $25,000 a kid in their schools is because 70 to 80% of that is raised locally. And it gives you local financial control over your buildings, but there's certainly an equity between Claremont and Fall Mountain, or Claremont and Hanover, or districts like that. So it doesn't achieve any equity among the districts.
And so there's some piece of the legislation you want to talk about where you can raise additional.
There's a piece of legislation where you can raise, and they're talking about capping it at 15% or 25% over the foundation. The problem is it's not clear in how it's written. Does that mean that Woodstock can raise 15% more, or District 5 that we're a member of all the way down to Brattleboro can raise additional money, and then it has to be distributed to every high school and every elementary school within our district?
Hey, Corinne, Anna, how much of the just kind of basics of what got rolled out by Zoe Saunders, Secretary Saunders on Thursday are you familiar with? I mean, the 5 districts, you've heard of this?
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Okay, great.
I'm guessing Karen is more familiar than I am, but I have read all the emails that were sent out to us.
Okay, great. Just doing.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And so I'm not sure that Woodstock could do what this district is used to doing.
Right.
Because you'd be part of a 5 or 6 high school district, and you'd have to be equitable across all your schools.
Yeah, and Matt Stout, we had a meeting today with both of our representative Charlie Kimball, Senator Allison Clarkson, Carrie, Matt, and I, and Jim was there as well, just to kind of get legislative perspective. And Matt was making reference to some information out of Montpelier that he read, indicating that, tax decisions, spending decisions would have to be a district-wide decisions, right? That it wouldn't be kind of community focused or school focused. We're accustomed to our school district, we're fairly, close to things. Like if we talked about, and we're about to talk about the budget here in a moment, but when we talk about taking 2 positions from the high school, right, that has a direct correlation to the tax rate, and we're using that to achieve our goals. That what we set out to do is get under the penalty threshold before we move the goalpost. But anyway, those would be far more difficult for anybody at the local level to have any kind of correlation if you're talking about a school district that's a fifth of the state.
There is some proposed restructuring of the taxes where homestead and non-homestead are the same rate. And then homestead people will have the economic of the ability, if they are below a certain threshold, to get a rebate on it, but that they would have the same tax rate for both homestead and non-homestead.
Yeah.
Is anyone at all talking about the idea of income, not income sensitivity, but I guess funding education through income tax rather than property tax?
Yes, and that's come up, again and again since Act 60. The problem with Vermont is well, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth or take them out of context. But Vermont, and you can go back to interviews in the Digger or 7 Days with Howard Dean, where he talks about when they were looking at Act 60, whether to make it a property-based tax system or an income-based tax system. And there were 2 reasons that Dean gave at the time. One was that wealthy people don't have income, truly wealthy people. They just have investment income, right? And so they wouldn't wind up participating in education funding at all.
Well, investment income gets taxed
It
still.
does, but it doesn't,
It's
there's-
not
yeah,
the
by
amount.
and large, wealthy people do not, report income, right? Year in and year out. And as a result, at the state level, at least, we're far less sophisticated than the feds. You would wind up having the entire burden of the education system fall on, the middle and lower classes of society. The second reason, and probably the more practical one, is that there isn't enough money made in income to pay for our education system. We just don't have that level of income, but we have a lot of property and a lot of high value property in the state. So it makes more sense to make property based and then give people credits based on their income if they can't afford to pay at the level of their property.
Right. Do you hear anybody like representing, um, Vermont cities and towns, or like, I don't know, who am I thinking of? Sort of like rural alliance, or like folks who are concerned about sort of the fabric of Vermont, and bringing forward. I mean, obviously, people are bringing forward concerns, but um, the idea of, I mean, my worry with the top down, my biggest worry with the top down approach is that the the smallest places, the rural places. I know there's a lot of talk about, oh, the problem is that the quality isn't there for education, right? But I'm not sure I understand why closing those schools is like the answer, rather than let's figure out a way to bring the resources to those schools. And something like a statewide teacher contract where teachers aren't incentivized to leave those towns, after they've started as a teacher and then move to the higher paying towns. I don't know, something like that affects that. But sometimes schools, the enrollment caps and stuff on schools don't take into account, geographic distance and all these kinds of things. So it just seems like what needs to happen is for somebody to bring forward an alternative that does sort of bring some of the administrative costs, maybe, and functions more centralized, but where there's still some, it's not necessarily about local control, but it's about, regional, like, knowledge and insight of what's going on there, and what different schools need, and where the strengths are, and how you can, like, Sherry, you would know better, what's going on in our district than some superintendent in charge of a bigger space. So I don't know. I mean, I get the move. I understand that there's a lot of barriers in the way of good decisions being made. And sometimes those decisions might be to close a school because it's not performing well, and maybe it's not necessary because there are other alternatives. But it's not going to be as simple as they're making it sound. And it seems like it needs to be a process where you have folks who have some control at that mid-level, that more regional, smaller regional level, to make those decisions. And for them, and for, folks that actually have the ability to make those decisions. I don't know. So I mean, obviously, in the absence of any other alternatives being brought forward, that could show also, how the funding issues are being addressed. It's just gonna go on. It's just gonna keep moving forward, and I worry that the state is just gonna be gutted in the end. I don't know.
On?
Yeah, I have to say, I don't know the details clearly as much as y'all have since you've been chatting with state leadership and legislators. To me, it feels very much, Karen, you had asked about why. And I think because the per pupil cost at smaller schools is such an easy thing to identify as a way to save money. And I feel like it's very short-sighted, you know, when we think about closing our rural schools. And yeah, the per pupil cost is higher there, but as you had shared with that Rural Alliance email, that these are the schools that, you know, most kids with special or additional needs at school where they really thrive. Um, it it does not take into account that, you know, if we have here in Reading, you know, a sixth grader, and I'm going to skip right over pre-K because I won't even talk about 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds sitting on a bus for 45 minutes, right? We talk about emissions, we talk about the costs of adding those bus routes, without talking about what it is to ask any one of us as an adult to sit for 45 minutes in a car to go to work. And now we're asking a small child to do that. And now we're talking about, you know, okay, let's talk about the older children and putting, you know, your elementary school kids on with the high school kids or even the Prosper Valley kids, right? I think there's a lot of short sight around that. It's very concerning. And when we talk about decision making, I'm all about equity, and it's going to be complicated to make equitable decisions and get as close to equity as we can in this state. But when we talk about one superintendent managing, you know, our school versus arguably any other school, we lose the fine tune and sensitivity to our district, to our schools. And I feel like the more power that gets sucked up into that top level, the less we hear the voices of the students, the less we hear the voices of the teachers, right? Now we have one voice, a superintendent for, I think y'all said 10 to 15 high schools or 5 to 10 high schools, right? How many middle schools are included there? How many elementary schools are included there, right? We're not just talking about 5 or 10 schools now, we're talking about a magnitude higher, right? So for every high school, maybe there's, you know, we have what, 3 or 4 elementary schools, right? The number of schools that all of those voices have to filter through one superintendent who, you know, maybe doesn't get along with folks or, you know, has more time to spend at one school instead of another. And we lose so much of that local input. I don't want to say control, but input. And that is, and again, this was just, I listened to the news brief and read an email and I was like, that doesn't feel good inside. And then the more that I think about it, and as I was reading the email, Karen, that you shared with us and hearing with our leadership, like, it's so disheartening and it's so frustrating. I'm gonna cry. Thank you for receiving me like this. It just feels like we continue to cut our education to our children. And it feels much like we're spinning our wheels, right? We're trying to make this less complex. We're trying to make this more cost effective. And who's really reaping those benefits? It doesn't seem like anybody does. It seems like this is going to be as complex, but no one wants to admit that we have to do all this law changing to get there. And our students are going to suffer. People are going to lose their jobs. And it's not going to make this any more simple or any more cost effective. And it's just really frustrating that this, in a time when our country is doing this, I was really grounded in the fact that we live in Vermont and it feels like there's ethical decisions being made in it. Now it feels like the same thing is happening in our state as it is at the country level. And so I'm really dismayed by this, and feel very powerless to even help make the decisions better. So that's how I'm feeling. Thanks.
I guess now is a good time as any. I share your sentiment, Anna, and Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that this legislative session is not going to undo the moratorium on school bonds that was put in place in the last legislative session. Um, I let Sherry and Carrie know this on Tuesday. This is a personal decision by me. It's based more on the fact that I've had some unforeseen developments in my personal life that will have me an Arizona resident here in the next year. And as a result, I am not running for school board for the next in March. And that term's up, and I'm not putting in my paperwork to continue. I won't be eligible. So, but if all this happens, neither will either of you or any of the current school board, right? Depending on how quickly this all goes, we'll be looking at not having a school board here or a Mountain View school district for too long. So, and from what we're hearing, I mean, this is this is being received well, among legislators. There's a lot of sentiment in Montpelier to do something about the skyrocketing tax rates, to change the formulas and things. There are a lot of new faces in the House there to achieve exactly that. And I don't think we have any reason to believe that some version of this isn't going to move forward. So I guess we'll all I'll continue to watch it until we have reason, as long as we have reason to watch it. Anything else to say on this one, team? I think we could probably talk about it all night.
I guess just one last question. Any other tidbits from Charlie Kimball? I mean, I know he's
Yeah, I mean,
fairly supportive of.
is Barnard isn't Charlie's, is it?
No.
Okay, well, I mean, I was gonna say you could talk to him directly, but yeah, I mean, he's Charlie's great, right? Like he's very focused on, okay, what do I need to take to be a part of these conversations? He sits on Ways and Means. He's very active in all of this, and he's saying things like, what do we do about school choice, right? Because right now the prevailing kind of sentiment is that there will be universal school choice in the state, right? And so we'll build, I don't know, in the next 10 years, 3 to 5 brilliant regional high schools in each district that nobody has to go to, right? So anyway, yeah, hey Karen. So other considerations, I don't know. He's really just kind of focused on the details of what needs to change in the current system, right? And one thing we did talk about, this was my observation that others seem to agree with, was that it doesn't seem likely that under a regional model that we would have one of these regional high schools be on the same site as our current school building in Woodstock. I mean, we're space constrained. We can't do 2,000 kids or 1,500 kids or whatever it is that they're looking to do here. It's not enough parking on the site, right? So we need to see a different location at that point, depending on where they draw the lines for a new, kind of catchment area for that school. I don't know. It's very likely that Woodstock would see the building at all. But I don't know. Sorry, Anna, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to, for the minutes, just confirm that the bond for new build is still not part of the budgeting legislature, i.e. we cannot put aside money at this point without it affecting our education costs.
Correct. If you tried to pass a bond now, it would all be in penalty phase. So, you're pass a $100 million bond, it's, $200 million impact to your tax rate.
But Charlie did say they have legislature written that they plan to move forward on around facility building that's based on the Rhode Island model.
Right. Yeah, he did talk about that. That the what's it called? The Task Force on School Construction Aid has put forward, is working to put forward something that would, consistent with where we started the conversation, the governor kind of dictating these changes and saying, where school buildings should go, that's the hard work that I was referring to. Then, if you had the task force coming through and saying, okay, we have these new districts, here are the locations based on the, current enrollment data, and, then coming up with the funding for it. But, who owns that debt at that point, right? I mean, the suggestion I made was to make all, school construction costs, categorical aid, like special ed, that's shared by the entire tax base of the state, that no individual district would see a spike in their taxes as a result of building a school building, particularly now where local communities are losing the ability to decide to build them.
And if they go with the Rhode Island model type of plan for new buildings, then that's the way it would be.
Right, that's what they do. But we'll see what all shakes out. I don't know. There's probably a lot more that got said, but I don't know how kosher it is to tell those tales out of school.
And really, the next 6 weeks are critical because if anything's going to carry over, it has to be Passover in mid-March. So the next 6 weeks, I may be spending a lot more time in Montpelier, and I've offered to do that. So.
Why don't we move to the next agenda item, which is kind of a review of the budget. And by review, I think it's kind of just a check into where we are in the process. And that is, our last board meeting, the board passed a budget, right? And to take to the taxpayers, I don't think that all these developments, all this turbulence around state education funding helps, at the polls in March. I guess we'll see how people react to it. But when people get nervous, they only have one button to push. And so they just vote no on school budgets, right? Which is unfortunate. But we'll see. And I guess what I wanted to just have in the minutes, if we could capture it, is the fact that, we put a good faith budget out there, and we'll get a response, or we'll get some developments out of Montpelier on kind of things that will affect the tax rate between now and March. And if, it looks like we're going to be seeing a very different tax rate than the ones that we projected, like the last board meeting, we as a board can tell our voters to vote no. We didn't have an opportunity to have all the information. But, or if it gets voted down, then we'll have to come back together as a board and, make some decisions about, where we want the budget to go and try again. Right?
Yeah, we posted positions we know we need to fill in order to meet the needs of kiddos. And then we're also posting other positions as anticipated, because until we have a passed budget, we really can't hire new people. So.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but how do you hire someone right now under the assumption that, in 2 years our district could dissolve and, we may not need. I keep thinking of, our food program and how farm to table that is, and how that's going to be lost to a larger, cheaper food product if we end up in larger districts, or I don't know, maybe the legislature will write some more detailed aspects that will allow some more local control around stuff like that.
Hard to say, but if you're a teacher and you're trying to decide between, one of our schools and something across the river, New Hampshire, that would seem a little more secure.
Sure.
I also wanted to kind of open it up to any discussion of, the overall budget process, just kind of a reflection, right? It was a lot of work that went into it. We talked about it at several meetings. I don't know if there's appetite tonight to do any kind of post-mortem, especially since nothing's dead or at this point. But I guess, Corinne, go ahead.
Yeah. One thing that I would have been thinking about, maybe it's something that I just talked with Carrie briefly about this. But it felt like at the end everything was kind of rushed, right? This decision making was rushed. I mean, it kind of had to be, but I feel like the way the board made its decisions was within a context of some confusion, or differing thoughts about what it was that we were deciding. And I wondered if it might be helpful for the board to, so just to be a little more explicit, normally what we're doing as a board is passing a number, to put on the ballot to be approved. And that's based upon an overview of a budget and priorities and whatnot. This year, obviously, we got a little more specific in terms of, what as a board we said we were supporting that was different from the first draft of the budget that came back in response to, feedback we'd heard mainly around UA. But that discussion, that all happened very fast. And I think that, there were a lot of us who wanted to possibly support a budget number that went over the threshold, but where there was still flexibility for for the leadership to play with that as they thought appropriate to priorities in the different buildings. And I don't know if there could be time for us as a board to say something formally, as decisions are made over the next few months and into the spring around programming and staffing to sort of give some sort of flexibility back, or a sense of flexibility so that, leadership can feel like they can be creative with staffing, and optimize it across the buildings.
Corinne, I guess where can you give me an example of where you see that flexibility being exercised?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly how this would play out necessarily, but so and maybe it wouldn't. But so there's, even if we're just talking specifically about UA, right? There's a difference between saying, as a board, we support the unified arts sort of experience, the student experience to be comparable to what it has been in the past, such that, they're generally still getting, the amount of UA that they've had, versus saying we want there to be, or we're requiring that there be, the exact number of FTEs that there are now. I mean, I think that those potentially could be different things based on the fact that like different teachers spread their time across buildings. So I don't know. I mean, I'm saying this in a not knowing the details, but I know that when you're looking at, you know, classroom schedules, teacher schedules, school buildings, calendars, staffs moving around, from what you guys have said, there's a lot of flexibility that can be leveraged to fill needs. And I just hope that the leadership wouldn't feel constrained at, I don't know. I want them to feel as little constraint as as possible.
Can I respond? There's no way we're going near UA now. I mean, the principals made the recommendation. It took a lot of energy and time and consideration. And after the pushback from community and the response of the board, you will not see a principal going near UA. The only thing that I anticipated and I spoke to the union about is if we post a position that's not filled, the principals will make a recommendation in terms of schedule, and that'll begin May 1st. So that when elementary teachers leave, they'll know what the expectations are. We can't not post those positions because that would be a rift beyond the piece. So principals are not going near UA. They're not willing to put
Prime
themselves.
example of what Fran was talking about is the Latin position that's been restored through the board action to a full FTE. Regardless of what happened with the UA, it's not a full FTE worth of work. We're going to be reducing it anyways. Now we can't.
Right.
So now we have to have that full instead of a 0.6 or 0.8, which would make a lot more sense in the curriculum
Yeah,
and
so,
structure of the high school.
right, so Aaron is planning to assign her to other work, which will be fine for next year, but so she will be teaching other sections. But if what comes to pass with the budget, she doesn't have a plan for the year after.
Right.
So that's the long term, beyond, well, not long term, that's the next budget we start working on.
In May.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I haven't had a lot of activity from community members who, kind of reach out to me about school board matters, but what I have heard from people is we're in penalty phase, right? And then, standard things that, whatever, some of the things we've considered as a board, like different cuts, people like proposing those things, we consider this, we consider that, like, this is unacceptable that we're in penalty phase. Anna?
For what it's worth, I want to bring this idea of the flexibility that we've been able to employ that leadership has done so fantastically with to meet budget needs would be lost if we had large districts. This ability to share teachers across schools, I just don't see that happening. That fluidity that has been so notable in our creative budgets. Just I don't know if that's a point that someone can bring to legislators or whatnot, but thanks.
Yeah, so I guess we're kind of in a we'll see mode. And that's probably a good segue to the last substantive item I have on the agenda tonight, which is board finance committee composition, for the next board really, which begins at our school board meeting in March is the reorganization meeting. As I said, will not be on the board at that time. Will not be the co-chair of the board or the vice chair of the board. Will not be chair of the finance committee. I've talked to a couple other members of the board who will be continuing on and kind of tested interest in being on finance, potentially chairing the committee. So I say there is some interest out there among other board members, but we'll have to see where it goes. But I would encourage Anna, Corinne, you guys to stay on finance if you're interested. But it's going to be wild getting through. Hopefully we pass the budget on our first try. That the community members who showed up in droves to talk about how we can't touch unified arts will show up in the same numbers at the polls and encourage others to do the same. That was kind of the board's strategy, or at least my thinking when I voted to back away from the cuts to unified arts. Was looking for kind of friends to pass the budget. Anyway, I guess we'll see in the next finance committee. We'll have to.
So who will present the budget at the
February meeting?
Yeah.
I'll still be on board.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, and I have to thank you, Ben. I've survived many a board, and I think the finance committee is in the best shape it's ever been. The quality of the dialogue of the three of you, the kinds of conversation, the level of involvement is really, we're benefiting from that. Jim and I, the district community are, that you and Carrie were able to meet with principals and really hear them and support their work. But thank you. You've laid huge foundational processes, structures, philosophy that is greatly appreciated by this individual.
Yeah, sure. It's all about the what if scenarios worksheet right there.
There's a lot more there. There's a lot more there.
And the big lift I see for this committee next year is your new strategic plan requires us to develop a financial strategic plan. And I'm starting on that path, and I will be looking for your input and guidance as we go forward.
Yeah, I don't know where you look for models for that. You had a capital plan, that's a thing. Financial strategic.
I found a couple from
They're good.
GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association. No affiliation with schools, but they do it at the municipal side.
Huh.
And I can adopt one of theirs pretty simply to to ours, and there's some strategies and really our strategic plan. As I looked at the model that I'm kind of heading towards, by accident, we did a lot of the steps in it.
Oh, awesome.
So we did okay by accident, but we're going to actually memorialize it into a plan. And the financial strategic plan looks at several things. First is to how do you support in a sustainable manner any new educational initiative brought through the strategic plan. And the other is just long-term sustainability and stability of the tax rate of the buildings and of all the other things.
Hmm.
And so there's several forks of it, but the big purpose of it is to support the educational programs in the strategic plan.
Cool.
So,
It's exciting work.
yeah,
If we have a district.
All right.
well, we'll get it done and then we'll pass it on to Zoe so that as Jennifer
I'm
from
gonna
she
give
can do
stuff
it.
to Zoe.
Right. And do it on
She's
a
got a
state
lot of
basis.
freebies.
Yeah, so good luck to those who are continuing on. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Any
For everything that you've given.
truly,
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't know if this isn't the full audience that should hear this, but you really have been the rock foundation of this finance committee, both as we work in a small group, but also everything that's been developed and presented and advocated and everything to our staff, to our district leaders, to our public. I know you've had a couple of run-ins with the public and handled yourself magnificently. And I can't tell you how impressed I am with everything that you've done, whether you see it as a success or not. Everything that you've done has been absolutely flawless. And I really appreciate all the effort you've put into this. So thank you.
thank you. Well, I don't have anything better to say than that. So,
Well, and I didn't even prepare that, and we don't have the full board in front of us. So wait till you see what I have to write for your last meeting.
coffee mug.
No, I'm holding back on my mug.
Oh, yeah, no mug for me. Okay.
No mug for you.
You're gonna get like a full China set.
Yeah. Anything further before we adjourn?
No, I'll make a motion for adjournment. I'll send out the meeting minutes. Everybody could take a peek at the meeting minutes. Adjournment motion for 7:18.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned at 7:18. Thanks all.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good night.
Okay.